Question 1. Our ability to preserve a safe environment for future generations depends on our empirical understanding of the natural world. Our ability to conduct effective social programs that lower our ecological footprint and promote resilience in the face of extreme weather depends on our understanding of social behavior. Does your party support increased funding for both university-based and in-house public interest environmental and social science research? And part 2 of question 1 is, if your party formed the next government, would you allow federal government scientists to freely communicate their findings to the public? What, if any, restrictions would you apply? Andrew Park, you begin with 3 minutes, starting now.
Thanks very much, Roger. In 2011, Environment Canada scientist David Tarasek was blocked by communications officers from talking about the largest ozone hole ever found in the Arctic. In the same year, the Pearl Laboratory, tasked with measuring Arctic ozone, was shut down. The resulting hole in our ozone data was a telling metaphor for the Harper government's attitude to environmental science, which is kind of like no science, no evidence, no truth. Because the Tories really do not like environmental science. They don't like climate science. They don't like funding for climate adaptation, or the basic long-term monitoring of our environment that only governments can do. And of course, they don't like to allow scientists to talk to the public, at least not without a big filter. 40 federal programs have been cut or eliminated since the Harper government got a majority. We've seen libraries in dumpsters, we've seen laboratories closed, valuable data and specimen archives have been defunded. Up to this year, Fisheries and Oceans have lost about 1,075 jobs, Environment Canada 700. Total budget for Environment Canada has been cut by about 40%. The result is rock bottom morale and the failure to even enforce such laws as do exist. To this end, the Green Party of Canada believes that we have to rebuild our scientific capacity in Environment Canada, in Fisheries and Oceans, in Parks Canada and Health Canada, and we'll dedicate $75 million a year to that purpose. Our priorities include restoring habitat protection to the Fisheries Act, restaffing the Ocean Contaminants and Marine Toxicology Program, reversing cuts to the Canadian Coast Guard, particularly in emergency responses and spill prevention, restoring the Navigable Waters Protection Act, and reversing cuts to climate adaptation programs. We will direct the Clerk of the Privy Council to elevate core scientific activities over the politicised management culture of the scientific civil service. For the good of the country, we have to strip away the communication barriers that prevent federal scientists talking about their work to the public. Scientists have to be free to speak about the scientific content of their work. We need to hire a chief science advisor as an objective, independent officer of Parliament. And finally, we need to start the long and painful process of restoring federal science libraries. But it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to happen overnight. Valuable scientists have taken early retirement. Some have left the country, such as shark biologist Steve Campana. And we need to scour the world to get those folks back. We need to appeal to those who rescued books from dumpsters to keep them safe against the time when they're needed. And that will only happen in a federal government where the culture of science and evidence is sacrosanct.
Would there be any limits on science as far as reporting to the public, even if it's completely different from government policy? 1 minute, you can address that, or anything else that you've heard so far. Andrew Park of the Greens.
Okay, well, in terms of the ability of federal scientists to talk to the public, I think it's fairly clear that they need to be able to address the scientific findings of their work. Policy is still made by governments, okay? Policy is made by governments, and it would be inappropriate for federal scientists to undermine government policy by, going outside of their expertise and, saying this policy is garbage, no matter how much they may think that. But in terms of addressing the science that your tax dollars are paid for, they should be free to speak out. And President Obama has liberated federal scientists in the USA from the yoke of the Bush years, and they're actually able to answer questions without the interposition of 9 levels of communications officers. Got a lot more I can say probably today.
Question number 2. Scientifically informed international agreements to limit climate change impacts, to which Canada is a party, have concluded that global warming must be held below 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, with a possible tightening to 1.5 degrees. In order to have an 80% chance of meeting that 2-degree limit, greenhouse gas emissions in 2011 to 2050, that period must be capped at a total carbon budget of 565 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent. You following me? This represents emissions from just 20% of the current total of fossil fuel reserves. I'll repeat that because this is an important part. This represents emissions from just 20% of the current total of fossil fuel reserves, leaving the remaining 80% of fossil reserves unburnable. What measures and targets is your party committed to introduce to ensure that Canada does not exceed its share of international targets and transitions to a low-carbon economy? As well, what measures is your party committed to introduce to enhance the resilience of our economy, infrastructure, and homes to extreme weather events entrained by global warming? And the final part of question 2 is, what additional measures will you personally urge your party and the federal government to pursue?
Unburnable carbon is the 2,860 gigaton elephant in the room. These are the proven reserves held by global energy corporations, and to keep global warming at or below 2 degrees, we've got to leave between 25 and 33% of those proven reserves in the ground. It's a truth that the Tories deny, and it's a truth that the NDP and the Liberals would prefer to ignore. NDP candidate Linda McQuaid kind of speed-dated with this truth, but her campaign manager at NDP Central made sure she didn't get a second date. And within a couple of days, Thomas Mulcair was claiming that they could grow oil sands production and simultaneously reduce our carbon emissions. And as a scientist who studied these issues, I'm telling you that neither technically nor economically are these pathways feasible. What will the Green Party do? We will oppose any new pipelines or pipeline expansions that would carry diluted bitumen, because, as Elizabeth said, in the expansionist view of the oil sands companies, it's not whether we choose pipelines or rail to transport bitumen, they're going to use both. We'll cut the $1.3 billion in indirect subsidies, cold turkey. We've had enough of this corporate welfare. It amounts to many billions over the years. The Green Party of Canada is the only party to consider the effect of carbon pricing on low-income Canadians. Our fee and dividend approach, which is explained in a handy flyer at the back, is revenue neutral. The fee, which will be imposed at the wellhead or the point of import, will be redistributed as an equal check to adult Canadians. We know that it works. British Columbia has a very similar scheme, and it has seen per capita fossil fuel use fall by 16% with no visible effect on either the economy or economic activity. We'll act to cut emissions in other sectors of the economy as well, while promoting investment in clean technology and innovation. We'll invest $6.4 billion annually, about 1% of the GST, in infrastructure renewal, and this will include installing energy retrofits on the entire existing housing stock, and that alone could save up to 12% of our current carbon emissions. We'll start a $1 billion Cree Technology Fund to smooth the path from green ideas to the marketplace, and this will help to fuel both innovation and economic diversification. And we will act to restore funding for research and practical measures to adapt to climate change to the tune of $500 million a year. Our climate plan is an integrated framework of social, economic, and science-based measures that will have a real impact on CO2 emissions. I've been to 5 different events now where Matt has described how ending poverty is part of the NDP constitution, which is great, but it's the Green Party that actually has policies that would achieve that goal. We've postulated a guaranteed livable income, a program, incidentally, that a number of Canadian mayors are beginning to take on board, that would ensure that no Canadian would live below the poverty line. And our fee and dividend actually adds a progressive element to carbon pricing, because the poor are potentially vulnerable when carbon is priced, including under cap and trade. And there's a lot to worry about under cap and trade. Cap and trade in Europe has failed spectacularly. The EU Observer reported in 2009 that the exchange trading system has been a magnet for tax fraud on a grand scale, costing government coffers around 5 billion euros, and it's even being investigated by Europol, Europe's Criminal Intelligence Agency. As much as 90% of the entire market volume of emissions exchanges was caused by fraudulent activity. And finally, it's potentially riddled with exemptions, and Glenn Murray of Ontario has already said he will have exemptions for as many as 20 industries.
Question number 3, again, a bit of a preamble here, and then we'll get to the question. In 2012, amendments were made to the Navigable Waters Protection Act for Bill C-45, which have left thousands of rivers and lakes without federal protection. That means that project development can occur on smaller bodies of water without first determining whether it will negatively influence the quality of the water and surrounding ecosystem. Clean water, essential to our health and ensuring the health of our waterways, needs to be a priority. In August of this year, Our Living Waters, a national initiative that works together with leaders in Canada's water community, proposed that the Government of Canada set a national target of all waters in Canada in good health by 2025. Now, water is a shared need, a shared responsibility. Manitoba, fortunate to hold the 10th largest freshwater body in the world, Lake Winnipeg. Water is shared and used by people from all different backgrounds and is impacted by actions that take place across multiple jurisdictions. The question is, several parts to it. If elected, how will your party work collaboratively with other parties, other levels of government, with First Nations leaders towards the proposed target of all waters in Canada in good health by 2025? And what will your party do to ensure that clean water, water protection, and access to water will be given due consideration before enacting any other legislation that could negatively impact water? Next up is Andrew Parker.
Oil is going to be the most precious resource of the 21st century. I think there's general agreement about that. In Canada, we have a freshwater resource that's the envy of the world, but we've removed a good deal of its protection. And in certain hotspots like the Athabasca oil sands region, the province and the feds have been derelict in their monitoring of both water quality and ecological health. We need to work with the provinces, with the cities and First Nations to create a national water policy. The policy needs to aim at managing whole watersheds, protecting water sources, restoring wetlands, supporting community-based water conservation and efficiency, as well as factoring in the effects of climate change. Special consideration is needed to improve access to clean water on First Nations reserves. Shoal Lake is just the tip of a dirty water iceberg. There were 169 drinking water advisories in 126 First Nations communities in 2015. And like Shoal Lake, some of these have been in place for years, if not decades. In the next Parliament, our immediate actions must include reversing changes to the Fisheries Act, including restoring the habitat protection provisions, improving our definition of what is a harmful practice, removing exemptions from the Act for favoured industries. We need to restore protection to the majority of our lakes and rivers under the Navigable Waters Protection Act. In particular, we have to start applying this Act to pipeline crossings, which are currently exempt. We will invest $800 million a year for basic infrastructure, including housing and clean water for Canada's First Nations. We will continue our opposition to bulk water exports. These were kind of left a bit open-ended under NAFTA and may be a threat under the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We will increase Canadian aid for access to basic water requirements and sanitation, consistent with the Millennium Development Goals. And in particular, we want to replace federal guidelines for drinking water quality with binding national standards that secure clean drinking water and human health. And of particular relevance to Lake Winnipeg, we want to establish a Canada Water Fund of $215 million for 5 years, for each year for 5 years. It'll focus on long-term watershed health, reducing runoff, pollutants and nutrients, and refunding a continued Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. In summary, we seek to acknowledge that water is a human right. We seek to protect the fish and other organisms that live in our waters. and we seek to improve and protect water quality for both humans and ecosystems. But at the same time, I've got to acknowledge that it may be a pretty tall order to have all natural water bodies in healthy condition by 2025, because some of our water bodies are under a great deal of pressure.